Alia had long since mastered the art of hiding her pain behind a smile. Every morning, when she tied the faded white apron around her uniform and pinned her hair neatly back, she put on not just her nurse's cap, but also her invisible armor. The world saw a gentle, composed young woman, kind with her words, steady with her hands, and unshakably calm in the storm of suffering that hospitals often were. What no one saw were the sacrifices that lived in her shadow. At only 24, Alia had endured more than most women twice her age. When she was 17, her parents had died in a road accident, leaving her and her younger brother Hamza alone in the world. Overnight, she went from being a carefree girl to the head of a household. She had been bright in her studies, dreaming of becoming a doctor one day, but those dreams had been buried under bills, responsibilities, and survival. Nursing school was cheaper, quicker, and practical. It guaranteed work. For Alia, life stopped being about her ambitions. It became about making sure Hamza had a chance at his. That morning, after returning from an exhausting double shift, she found Hamza waiting for her, his small shoulders stiff with worry. He held out a paper with trembling hands. "Baji, they said if I don't pay the fee this week, they won't let me sit in the exams." Alia glanced at the receipt, her heart tightening. The amount printed there was nearly everything she had left in her purse. Her monthly salary had already vanished into rent, groceries, and the endless list of expenses that came with keeping a home. She felt the familiar wave of helplessness rise, but she swallowed it down, forcing a smile. She ruffled his hair gently. "Don't worry, Hamza," she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "You'll sit for your exams. Your Baji will take care of it, always." She handed over the money that night, and when she opened her own cupboard later, she found the shelves almost bare. No spare cash for herself, not even for something as simple as a new pair of shoes. The old ones she wore to work were wearing thin, and her uniform had grown so faded she often spent her breaks stitching tears to make it last a little longer. A new dress, something bright, beautiful, that made her feel like a young woman again, felt like a luxury belonging to another world. That evening, during her short break, she sat quietly in the hospital garden. The bench creaked under her slight frame as she pulled out a small sewing kit from her bag. Patiently, she threaded a needle and began repairing a rip in her sleeve. The fabric was thin, almost transparent in some places from overwashing, but she had no choice. She hummed softly to herself, pretending not to notice when passing nurses cast her pitying glances. She didn't want pity. She only wanted the strength to keep going. Inside the hospital in the children's ward lay one of her favorite patients, little Hania, a 7-year-old girl recovering from heart surgery. Fragile and soft-spoken, Hania had clung to Alia from the first day, perhaps sensing in her the tenderness of a mother she desperately needed. Whenever Hania cried from pain or fear, Alia was there, holding her hand, telling her stories, singing her lullabies. She didn't do it out of duty. She did it because she understood loneliness too well. She had once been a child yearning for comfort that no one could give. But Alia wasn't the only one noticing. Hania's father, Armin, had spent long hours in that hospital too. A man in his early 30s, he carried the sharp aura of success, always well-dressed, his phone buzzing with endless calls, his eyes accustomed to commanding boardrooms. He was a self-made businessman, admired and envied, but behind all the power lay a loneliness he never spoke of. His wife had left years ago, unable to handle the strain of his long working hours, and his daughter had become his only world. Armin had watched Alia quietly over the days. At first, she was just the nurse assigned to his daughter, but slowly he began to notice details. The way she never lost patience, even when exhausted. The way she smiled with her whole face, not just her lips. The way she treated Hania like family instead of a patient. And the way she wore the same washed-out uniform, neatly ironed but clearly old, day after day. Something about her stirred him. She wasn't like the women he usually met at high society gatherings, those who spoke in rehearsed tones, dressed in glittering clothes, and measured affection in exchange for favors. Alia was different. She gave without expecting anything in return. She carried dignity in her simplicity. One afternoon, when Hania was napping peacefully, Armin found Alia arranging the drip stand. He cleared his throat, feeling oddly nervous. "Miss Alia," he said softly. She looked up, her large eyes widening. "Yes, sir." He hesitated. He wasn't used to conversations that weren't about contracts or profits. "Can I ask you something personal?" Her brow furrowed in confusion, but she nodded politely. "Of course." He studied her for a moment, then asked, "When was the last time someone did something for you? Not because they had to, not because it was duty, but just because you deserved it." The question hit her like a stone dropped in still water. She froze, the words lodging in her chest. When was the last time? She thought back, but her memory only held images of her parents' death, of Hamza's needs, of long shifts and unpaid bills. No one had asked what she deserved. No one had thought about her. She forced a small smile, masking the ache his question had stirred. "Life doesn't give everyone such luxuries, sir. I'm happy enough when I can take care of my patients and my brother." But that night her words echoed in his mind. He lay awake in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his daughter's bed, thinking of her. She had said she was happy enough, but her eyes, when she said it, had betrayed the loneliness she carried. He wondered how many people in her life had failed to notice. The next day, as Alia prepared to leave after her shift, she found Armin waiting near the corridor. His tall figure looked strangely out of place among the nurses in their pale uniforms. In his hands, he carried a neatly wrapped box. "This is for you," he said, offering it forward. She froze, startled. "For me, why?" "Because you deserve it," he said simply. His voice carried no trace of arrogance, only sincerity. "I noticed you don't have a proper dress. Please don't be offended. I just wanted to give you something." Her face flushed. Instinctively, she shook her head. "I can't accept this, sir. It wouldn't be right. People will talk, and I don't need charity." Armin took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then don't accept it as charity. Accept it as a request." She blinked, utterly confused. "A request?" His gaze held hers, steady but vulnerable. "Yes, a request. Alia, will you be my first date?" For a moment, the world around her seemed to dissolve. The noise of the hospital faded, the footsteps and voices distant. She could only hear her own heart pounding in her ears. Did he really just say that? Her throat tightened. She had spent years convincing herself that love, affection, even simple companionship were luxuries she would never taste. And now, this man, someone who could have chosen anyone, was asking her, of all people, to be his first date. Her hands trembled as she clutched the box to her chest. Words wouldn't come. She could only stare at him, torn between disbelief and a fragile hope that dared to bloom for the first time in years. And in that moment, for the first time in her adult life, Alia allowed herself to wonder, maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't meant to be only about sacrifice. Maybe it was time for something more. Alia stood frozen, the wrapped box still trembling in her hands. Her mind spun in circles, unable to process what had just happened. A date. With him. Her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. She finally found her voice, though it came out as a whisper. I don't understand. Why would you ask me that?" Armin's expression softened, the sharpness of his usual demeanor gone. "Because I've never asked anyone before. I've spent my entire life working, building, proving myself. But watching you these past weeks, I realized something. You live with so little, yet you give so much. You care in a way most people don't anymore. I don't want perfect, Alia. I want real. And you," he hesitated, then finished, "you are the most real person I've ever met." Her eyes blurred with unshed tears. For years she had heard only silence from the world. She had grown used to being invisible, just another nurse in a sea of uniforms, just another woman carrying burdens quietly. And now this man, who could have had anything, was telling her she was enough. More than enough. Still, doubt clawed at her. She shook her head faintly. "But I'm just a nurse. I don't have wealth or family name or anything to offer someone like you. People will laugh. They'll say you've lost your mind." Armin stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let them laugh. Their opinions don't matter to me. What matters is how I feel when I see you. What matters is that my daughter, who trusts no one easily, looks at you like you're her safe place. And what matters," he paused, his eyes locking on hers, "is that I don't want this chance to slip away." Her heart clenched painfully. She wanted to believe him, but fear had been her companion for so long that hope felt dangerous. She hugged the box tighter. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything tonight," he replied gently. "Just open the box when you're alone. If you wear what's inside, I'll know your answer." And with that, he left, leaving her trembling in the dimly lit corridor, her breath shallow and her emotions colliding inside her like waves. That night in her small rented room, Alia sat on her bed staring at the box. Her fingers hovered over it, hesitant. She had never owned anything so carefully wrapped before. Most of her clothes were second-hand gifts from neighbors or things she had stitched from scraps. Slowly, with trembling hands, she undid the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay a simple yet elegant dress, soft blue in color, its fabric flowing like water under her fingertips. It wasn't extravagant. It was exactly the kind of dress she had once dreamed of owning when she was younger, before life had taught her not to dream. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pressed the fabric against her face. For once, someone had thought about her, not as a caretaker, not as a provider, but as a woman. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror on the wall, holding the dress against her. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine. What if she said yes? What if she stepped into a world she had always believed was not meant for her? The thought scared her, but it also lit a small flame inside her that she didn't want to extinguish. The following Saturday evening, Armin waited nervously in a quiet, elegant restaurant. It was unlike him to be nervous. He had closed deals worth millions without blinking, had spoken to hundreds of investors with steady confidence. Yet tonight, his hands fidgeted and he kept glancing at the door. He didn't know if she would come. He didn't even know if she had opened the box. All he knew was that he wanted her to. When the door finally opened, time seemed to slow. Alia stepped in, her head bowed slightly, her hands clutching her small purse as though it were her anchor. She wore the dress. The soft blue clung to her frame modestly yet beautifully, and though she had paired it with her worn-out shoes, she looked radiant. The glow wasn't from the dress. It was from her shy smile, from the way her eyes sparkled nervously when they met his. Armin stood instantly, his breath catching in his throat. "You look," his voice faltered, then steadied. "Perfect." Alia blushed, lowering her gaze. "I feel strange," she admitted honestly. "I've never worn anything like this. I've never even been to a place like this." He smiled warmly. "Then tonight will be the first of many. With me, you won't have to pretend, just be yourself." They sat across from each other, the candlelight flickering between them. At first, Alia was stiff, unsure of how to behave. She kept adjusting her sleeves, kept glancing around nervously as though someone might scold her for being there. But Armin spoke to her gently, asking about her brother, her childhood memories, her dreams. Slowly she relaxed, her laughter soft and hesitant at first, then freer. For the first time in years, she wasn't Nurse Alia, the provider, the responsible one. She was simply a young woman sitting across from a man who truly saw her. Armin listened intently as she spoke about Hamza's dreams of becoming an engineer, about how she once loved painting but had no time for it anymore. Every detail she shared only deepened his admiration. He realized he didn't want this evening to be just a moment in time. He wanted it to be the beginning of a story. Halfway through the meal, he leaned forward, his tone earnest. "Alia, I know this must feel overwhelming, but I want you to know, I didn't ask you here to pity you or because I see you as charity. I asked you because you make me feel human. You make me want to live, not just exist." Her eyes widened, her throat tightening. She wanted to respond, but emotion held her tongue. Instead, tears shimmered in her eyes and she smiled, the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and disbelief. The rest of the evening unfolded like a fragile dream. They spoke, they laughed, they discovered little pieces of each other. And when it was time to leave, Armin walked her to the door, pausing before she stepped into the night. "I don't want this to be our last evening," he said quietly, "but the choice is yours. If you want, I'll never mention this again, but if you'll allow me, I want to walk beside you, not above you. I want to be part of your world and I want you to be part of mine." Alia looked at him, her heart aching with the weight of the decision. She thought of her brother, of her endless responsibilities, of the walls she had built around her heart. But then she thought of this man's eyes, of his daughter who already adored her, of the way he had spoken to her, not as a nurse, not as someone beneath him, but as an equal. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, Armin, but tonight, for the first time, I feel like I have one." He smiled, reaching gently for her hand. And in that simple gesture, two hands meeting, hesitant yet certain, their story truly began. For Alia, it wasn't just about a dress, or a date, or even love. It was about finally being seen, about realizing she didn't always have to carry the weight alone. And for Armin, it wasn't about breaking routine or filling emptiness. It was about finding someone who reminded him of what mattered most. The night air was cool as they stepped outside together, side by side. And in the quiet rhythm of their footsteps, hope bloomed, a hope neither of them had dared to dream before.